Hello, my name is Rebecca Beecroft, and I'm going to tell you the story of a gentleman who was wrongfully convicted. I am telling you this story today because for those of you who do not live in the state of Virginia, Virginia is one of 7 states that does not have parole. Currently in Virginia, 1 in 6 inmates is serving a life sentence for which they will never have a chance at redemption other than a pardon by the governor. I say this because it is so important that we understand truth and justice and how to help people who are in perilous situations because it could be any of us. So let's begin with the story of Jonathan Gilbert, who was wrongfully convicted of first-degree murder and robbery when he was 18 years old. This story is important because not only is the story about getting justice for Jonathan, but it's most importantly and most significantly about getting justice for Mr. Albert Basham, the 83-year-old taxicab driver who was murdered in a pretty horrific way over what may or may not have been a few dollars. And I think that if we focus just on Jonathan, we lose sight of the fact that a gentleman's life was lost. So whether or not the process was correct, whether or not he was guilty or not, which I will prove, it does not solve or erase the pain for the victims' families. It does not make anything better in their lives. It does not give them answers or closure any more than they had before. And I don't know what their understanding of the process was. And I don't feel it's my place to reach out to them to discuss this. But should the families come across this and have questions, I would certainly be open to discussing them with them. So that being said, let's begin our case at the beginning, which is on April 7th, 1997. And on April 7th, 1997, Mr. Albert Basham, or Basham, was reported at 7:46 in the morning by Don Van Dyke of the Richlands Water Department. Mr. Van Dyke called the police and said, "Hey, I found this taxi cab over here in the storage yard. It's behind the furniture place. You need to come and take a look." So, in fact, the police go and take a look. And while they are there, they meet some gentlemen who would like to give statements. The first gentleman is a Mr. Dean Anderson. And Dean Anderson at 6:15 that evening stated that on Friday at 4 or 4:30, he was going down to M.O. Warner's, and he saw a man carrying a black nylon duffel bag with a black leather jacket around it, and the man said that he was waiting for a ride, and he wanted to avoid the cops. Mr. Anderson said he had never seen this man before, and that the man had stated he was from Tennessee and that he had some family behind Big Lots. This gentleman had dark brown shoulder-length hair and a beard. He was in his mid to late 30s and wearing blue jeans. Danny Fonsley Brown stated at 4:36 p.m. on April 7th that on April 4th, he had been coming out of South Front Street toward Kentsbridge Road, close to Richlands Fire Department, and he had seen Mr. Basham, the cab driver, come across the railroad tracks from town into the brickyard. He was driving unusually fast for him, and it drew his attention to Mr. Basham, and that's when he noticed there was another man in the taxi. He would say that this man was a white man in his early to mid-40s with a black beard that had approximately 2 weeks growth, and he did not recognize this man, but he did not get a good look at him. So that being said, what we know so far is 2 people who last saw this vehicle on Friday are now on Monday saying we think it was a guy in his 30s or 40s. Now remember that Jonathan at this time is an 18-year-old young man who is approximately 5 feet 11 tall, weighs 180 pounds, has dark hair, glasses, and a clean-shaven face. I say that because that will become important. So now we will skip ahead into the investigator's report. This is the Town of Richland's Department of Police Criminal Investigative Report, which states that on 12/15, they were contacted by Mr. Clarence Jordan, who is a taxi cab operator. Mr. Jordan asked if they knew anything about Mr. Basham because he'd been missing since Friday. So at this point, the report states that they had found his vehicle, a four-door sedan, brown in color, with the driver's side window partially down, the glove box open, and no keys in the vehicle. Mr. Basham at this time, Basham, had not been found. At 1 p.m., they requested the State Police Aviation Division for helicopter aid for searching. Sergeant Dorton and Investigator Puckett were both tied up. So they requested Assistant Special Agent Roger Owens. So they did try to get outside investigative help. We then turn to the report by the medical examiner. Now, I won't read you the entire report because it has some interesting things, but some not so interesting things. But his actual cause of death was a stab wound horizontal, 2.5 by 0.3 centimeters to the upper left chest with a downward leftward inflection. Then he had a vertical stab wound that was also 2.5 by 0.3 centimeters to the central left chest, and that was backward and to the right. So his exact cause of death were injuries to the wound, a hemopneumothorax, which means he had blood in his lung and his lung wouldn't inflate. Therefore, he died by bleeding out and suffocating, which is 100% horrific. 100%. I do not say that lightly. He was noted to be in a tan windbreaker jacket, a light white jacket. A light white jacket and a white t-shirt. He had two areas to the jacket and undershirt that showed the stab wounds. He was wearing blue lined boxer shorts, black trousers, had a black leather belt, black socks, and black shoes. His pockets had been turned inside out, and his jacket had been pulled up kind of over his head. Okay. He had a variety of injuries noted. Abrasions to the scalp, to the lips, to the nasal bones. He had hemorrhagic suffusion of both conjunctiva, more on the right, really consistent with damage to those eyes, black eyes. Really, he'd really suffered some abuse at this point. He had some cutaneous emphysema and abrasion of the anterior chest wall, the stab wounds. He had an additional wound in the fourth intercostal space and the left intercostal space. He had partly avulsed upper front teeth, so he'd really been, kind of smacked in the mouth. A fracture of the left wrist and a contusion of the right wrist. He also had maggots noted in the left temporal and parietal areas of the skull, and his face and chest were covered in blood. So I tell you that because clearly this gentleman is really in some bad shape, and he really, whoever he was in a fight with, would have had some type of injuries, right? Because you don't get your face literally beat in without defending yourself. So what they say is they took fingernail clippings, head hair, a wristwatch, and a DNA card. They also took his jacket, his white t-shirt, his shirt, his black trousers, his boxer shorts, his belt, his socks, and his shoes. Okay, so then we have another copy of the autopsy report. And this one does not show anything exciting. I'm going to go ahead and, out of respect for the family, not provide a picture of this or any details, but if anybody wants it, they can certainly have it. So then we go into the next page, which is on April 8th at 1997 at 7:25 p.m. Jonathan is booked and read his rights. He is noted to have an educational level of 10th grade, no drugs or alcohol. He is 5'10", 155 pounds. He has green eyes and brown hair. He did sign, and the witness was Investigator Dorton. The next thing that happens in this situation, really for lack of my knowing what to call it, is we go into the interview with Jonathan. Now, there are multiple interviews with Jonathan. And at this point, there are 2 short interviews and a long interview. So I'm going to just pause for one moment and get all these pages in order. So now we are going to jump back in with the long interview. It begins with Officer Jack Davidson saying, "Don't worry about a thing, okay?" I will just say, I do have police folks in the family, and if any policeman in any situation ever said to me, "Don't worry about a thing," the first thing I'm going to do is panic, because that's an abnormal statement for anyone to make to you. So that set my haunches up. That being said, Jonathan proceeds to spell his name and indicate where he lives with his aunt, her address, and that he then has gone to his friend's house. So at this point, Jonathan states that he went through across the railroad tracks. I said, "Just go ahead and let me off at Helig Myers." I don't really know what that is because I'm not from Richlands, but everybody else seemed to know. So I say that because he admits he took a cab. Now, again, I say he took a cab because more confusion would love to present itself. Oh, and did I mention, we know this victim was brutalized. He was beat up. He had broken teeth. He had black eyes. He had fractures in his nasal bones. He had fractures to his skull that were bleeding. This was confirmed by the autopsy, and he was stabbed. And the single picture of Jonathan on booking, Jonathan has no injuries to his face. And I will tell you, they did not enter any pictures of his hands into evidence.